Emily Chen pressed her small face against the cold hospital window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. Her mother, Sarah Chen, lay motionless in the hospital bed behind her, connected to machines that beeped softly in the sterile room. The doctors had said the words that made Emily's world crumble: terminal illness, experimental treatment, and the phrase that haunted her dreams: not much time left. At 12 years old, Emily had already shouldered more responsibility than most adults. Since her father, David, had abandoned them 3 years ago, she had become her mother's caregiver, cooking simple meals, helping with medication, and pretending everything would be okay. But now, even pretending felt impossible. "Sweetie, come here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. Emily rushed to her mother's side, taking her frail hand in both of hers. Sarah's once vibrant brown eyes were now dim with pain and exhaustion, but they still held infinite love for her daughter. "Mom, the doctor said there might be a new treatment," Emily said desperately. "Something experimental in Romania. We could try." Sarah shook her head slowly. "Emily, my brave girl, we've talked about this. The treatment costs more money than we'll ever have. $200,000 might as well be $2 million. She squeezed Emily's hand with what little strength she had left. "I need you to promise me something. Anything, Mom, anything. When I'm gone, you'll go live with your Aunt Margaret in Oregon. She's already agreed. You'll have a good life there, go to school, make friends, like a normal kid should." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want a normal life without you. There has to be something we can do. Maybe I could get a job, or we could ask for help, or..." "Shh," Sarah soothed, though speaking took tremendous effort. "Sometimes we have to accept what we cannot change." That night, Emily couldn't sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair. She scrolled through her phone, desperately searching for any information about the experimental treatment in Romania. The clinic's website showed incredible success rates for patients with her mother's condition, but the cost remained impossibly high. As dawn broke over the city, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She remembered the strange old woman who had approached her in the hospital cafeteria the week before. The woman who introduced herself as Helena Blackwood had worn an expensive black coat and carried herself with an air of mystery that seemed out of place in the mundane hospital setting. "Your mother is very sick," Helena had said, not as a question but as a statement. "I might be able to help, but such help comes with a price." At the time, Emily had dismissed her as just another eccentric visitor, but now, with desperation clouding her judgment, she remembered Helena's business card tucked in her backpack. The card was made of thick black paper with silver lettering that seemed to shimmer: "Helena Blackwood Special Arrangements When Hope Seems Lost." Emily waited until her mother fell into a fitful sleep, then slipped out of the hospital room. She found a quiet corner in the hallway and dialed the number on the card with trembling fingers. "I knew you would call," came Helena's voice, smooth and knowing. "Meet me at Riverside Cemetery at midnight tonight. Come alone and tell no one where you're going." "But I'm just a kid," Emily protested. "How can you possibly help my mom? Age is just a number, child. Desperation makes us all equal. Your mother needs something that normal medicine cannot provide. I know someone who might be willing to make an arrangement." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily sat beside her mother, holding her hand and pretending to read a book while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Sarah's condition seemed to worsen by the hour. The nurses spoke in hushed tones outside the room, and Emily caught fragments of conversations about making her comfortable and saying goodbye. As evening approached, Emily's resolve strengthened. She couldn't lose her mother without trying everything possible. When visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, Emily kissed her mother's forehead and whispered, "I'm going to save you, Mom. I promise." The security guard barely glanced at Emily as she left through the main entrance. She had become a familiar sight over the past weeks, and everyone assumed she was going home to sleep. Instead, she took 2 buses across town to reach Riverside Cemetery, her heart pounding with each mile. The cemetery gate stood open despite the late hour, which seemed strange but somehow expected. Mist clung to the ground between the weathered headstones, and the moon cast eerie shadows through the bare branches of ancient oak trees. Emily had never been in a cemetery after dark, and every sound made her jump. She found Helena waiting beside a large mausoleum, her black coat billowing in the wind like wings. Up close, Helena appeared ageless, with pale skin and dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber that seemed to glow in the darkness. "You came," Helena said with approval. "That shows courage, child. Courage is exactly what you'll need for what comes next." "What kind of arrangement were you talking about?" Emily asked, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. "Can you really help my mom?" Helena studied Emily for a long moment, as if weighing her worth. "There is someone who possesses what your mother needs to survive, but he doesn't give such gifts freely. He requires service." "What kind of service?" "I'll do anything. He needs a companion, someone pure of heart who can see past the darkness that surrounds him. In exchange for your service, he will provide the cure for your mother's illness." Emily's mind reeled. "A companion? I'm 12 years old. This sounds like—" "Not what you think," Helena interrupted sharply. "This man is ancient and powerful, but he is not a monster in the way you fear. He is lonely, cursed to exist in isolation. Your innocence and compassion might be exactly what he needs to remember his humanity." "Where would I have to go? For how long?" "His castle is in Romania, in the Carpathian Mountains. You would serve as his ward, his companion, for 1 year. In return, your mother will receive the cure she needs and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life." Emily thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, growing weaker by the hour. "What if he hurts me?" "He won't," Helena said with conviction. "I give you my word. He may be many things, but he protects those under his care. You would be safer in his castle than in most places in this world." "I need to think about it. Your mother doesn't have time for lengthy deliberation. The offer stands until tomorrow night. After that, it will be too late." Helena disappeared into the shadows between the headstones, leaving Emily alone with her racing thoughts. She walked home slowly, her mind churning with impossible decisions. How could she leave her mother when she needed her most? But how could she let her mother die when there might be a way to save her? The next morning, Emily returned to the hospital to find her mother barely conscious. The doctors pulled her aside and gently explained that Sarah had maybe days left, possibly hours. Emily felt the walls of her world closing in. She spent the day holding her mother's hand, talking about their favorite memories and trying to memorize every detail of Sarah's face. As evening approached, Emily knew what she had to do. "Mom," she whispered, "I love you more than anything in the world. I'm going to save you even if you can't understand how. Please trust me." Sarah's eyes fluttered open and she managed a weak smile. "I trust you, sweetheart. You're the strongest person I know." That night, Emily packed a small bag with her most precious belongings, a photo of her and her mother, her favorite book, and the necklace her mother had given her for her birthday. She left a note for her mother, explaining that she had found a way to get the treatment and that she would return as soon as possible. Meeting Helena at the cemetery for the second time felt surreal. This time, a black car waited beside the mausoleum, its engine running silently. "Are you certain about this decision?" Helena asked. Emily nodded, though her hands shook as she climbed into the car.
"I'm certain."
Save my mom. The drive to the airport passed in a blur of city lights and nervous energy. Helen explained that they would fly to Romania that very night and that someone would be waiting to escort Emily to the castle. She also handed Emily an ornate silver locket. "Wear this at all times," Helena instructed. "It will protect you and show him that you come under my agreement." The private jet was unlike anything Emily had ever seen. The interior was decorated in rich fabrics and dark wood, and she was the only passenger besides Helena. As the plane lifted off, Emily watched her city disappear below the clouds and wondered if she would ever see it again. During the long flight, Helena told Emily more about the man she would serve. His name was Adrian Drackle, and he was the last of an ancient bloodline. He lived alone in a massive castle that had been in his family for centuries. He was intelligent, well-educated, and had accumulated vast wealth over his long life. "He's not exactly human," Helena admitted as they flew over the Atlantic Ocean. "He's what some might call a vampire, though he prefers the term immortal. He doesn't prey on innocents anymore, hasn't for many years. He sustains himself through other means." Emily's blood ran cold. "You want me to live with a vampire? A reformed one?" Helena corrected. "He's been alone for too long. The isolation has made him bitter and cold. Your presence might remind him of the goodness that still exists in the world." The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. Emily stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, wondering what her mother would think if she knew the truth. She thought about the stories her mother used to read to her about brave princesses who faced impossible odds to save the people they loved. Perhaps this was her fairy tale, except the monster might actually be a monster. They landed in Bucharest just as the sun was setting. Another black car waited on the tarmac, this one older and more elegant than the first. The driver was a silent man with gray hair and kind eyes who helped Emily with her bag and opened the door for her with old-fashioned courtesy. The drive through Romania was like traveling through a storybook. They passed through small villages with cobblestone streets and houses that looked like they hadn't changed in centuries. As they climbed into the mountains, the landscape became wild and beautiful, with dense forests and steep cliffs that disappeared into the mist. Finally, as midnight approached, they reached a massive iron gate set into a stone wall. Beyond the gate, Emily could see a long driveway winding up toward a castle that seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself. Towers reached toward the star-filled sky, and warm light glowed in several of the windows. The driver spoke for the first time during the entire journey. "Don't be afraid, little miss. Master Adrian is a good man, despite what others might say. He's been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." Emily clutched her small bag and stepped out of the car. The mountain air was cold and crisp, filled with the scent of pine trees and something else she couldn't identify. The castle doors, massive and made of dark wood, stood open as if she had been expected. She took a deep breath, thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, and walked through the doors into whatever fate awaited her. The last thing she saw before the doors closed behind her was Helena's car disappearing into the night, taking with it her last connection to the world she knew. Inside the castle, Emily found herself in a grand entrance hall with soaring ceilings and tapestries that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. A fire crackled in an enormous fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The castle felt ancient but well-maintained, as if someone cared deeply about preserving its grandeur. "Welcome!" came a voice from the shadows near the fireplace. "I am Adrian Drackle, and you, brave little one, have just saved your mother's life." Emily turned toward the voice, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. What she saw in that moment would change everything she thought she knew about monsters, fairy tales, and the thin line between salvation and sacrifice. Adrian Drackle stepped into the firelight, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't the grotesque monster she had imagined from horror movies and nightmares. Instead, he appeared to be a man in his 30s, with pale skin, dark hair that fell across his forehead, and the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. He was tall and elegant, dressed in a simple black shirt and dark trousers that looked expensive but comfortable. The only hint of his true nature was an otherworldly stillness about him, as if he existed slightly apart from the normal flow of time. "You're not what I expected," Emily said, surprised by her own boldness. A smile tugged at the corner of Adrian's mouth. "And what did you expect? Fangs and a cape? Perhaps some dramatic organ music in the background?" Despite her fear, Emily found herself almost smiling. "Something like that. I'm afraid I must disappoint you. I gave up theatrical villainy centuries ago. It was exhausting, and the costumes were terribly impractical." He gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the fire. "Please sit. You must be tired from your journey." Emily perched on the edge of a leather chair that was easily twice her size. Everything in the castle seemed designed for someone much larger than a 12-year-old girl. "Helena said you could save my mom. Is that true?" Adrian's expression grew serious. "Yes, I can save her. In fact, I already have. As we speak, a specialist from my personal medical team is administering treatment at your mother's hospital. By morning, she will begin to show signs of improvement." Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Really? You're not just saying that?" "I never lie about matters of life and death. Your mother will recover completely, though it will take several weeks. She will also find that her medical bills have been mysteriously paid in full, along with enough money in her bank account to ensure she never has to worry about finances again." The relief was overwhelming, but Emily forced herself to stay focused. "What do you want from me in return?" Adrian sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Companionship, conversation. Perhaps you could teach me what it means to see the world through innocent eyes again." He paused, studying her face. "You're not afraid of me?" "I am," Emily admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing my mom, and you seem different than what I expected." "I have lived for over 800 years," Adrian said quietly. "I have seen empires rise and fall, watched plagues sweep across continents, and witnessed humanity's capacity for both incredible cruelty and breathtaking kindness. But I haven't had a real conversation with another soul in decades." "Why not? Don't you have friends? When you are immortal, you learn to keep your distance. Everyone you grow to care about grows old and dies while you remain unchanged. It becomes easier to simply avoid attachments altogether." Emily considered this. "That sounds really lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise him. "I had forgotten how lonely until Helena told me about a brave little girl who was willing to sacrifice everything for her mother. I thought perhaps someone with such a pure heart might not see me as a monster." "Are you a monster?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I have done monstrous things in my long life. I have taken lives, made choices driven by hunger and anger rather than compassion. But I have also tried to make amends. I use my wealth to fund hospitals, schools, and research into diseases like your mother's. I suppose the answer is that I am a monster trying to become something better." Emily found his honesty refreshing after weeks of adults lying to her about her mother's condition. "Helena said I would be safe here." "You will be. I give you my word, and despite what you may have heard about my kind, I take such promises very seriously." He stood and walked to a window that looked out over the mountainous landscape. "Tomorrow, I will show you around the castle. It's quite large, but I think you'll find it comfortable. There's a library with books in dozens of languages, a music room with instruments from around the world, and even a greenhouse where I grow flowers that bloom year-round. It sounds beautiful. It is, but it's also empty. I built all of these wonderful spaces and then had no one to share them with." He turned back to her. "I hope that will change now." A woman appeared in the doorway, and Emily noticed she moved with the same otherworldly grace as Adrian. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "This is Mrs. Kovach," Adrian said. "She manages the household and will take care of anything you need. She's been with me for 40 years. Mrs. D." Kovach smiled warmly at Emily. "Such a brave little one. Your room is ready, child. I've prepared something warm to eat and drawn you a bath. You must be exhausted." Emily realized she was indeed tired. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past 2 days was finally wearing off. "Can I call my mom tomorrow? I want to make sure she's okay." "Of course," Adrian said, "though I suggest you tell her you're staying with a family friend while she recovers. The truth might be difficult for her to accept." Kovach led Emily through corridors lined with paintings and tapestries that seemed to tell the story of centuries. Emily's room was beautiful, with a canopy bed, a fireplace that crackled warmly, and windows that looked out over the forest. Someone had already unpacked her small bag and laid out fresh clothes that were clearly expensive but somehow exactly her size. "How did you know what size to get?" Emily asked Mrs. Beach. "Kovach, Master Adrian is very thorough in his preparations, Mrs. Bejo. Kovac replied with a mysterious smile. He has been planning for your arrival longer than you might think. After a warm bath and a simple meal of soup and bread, Emily lay in the enormous bed staring at the ceiling. The events of the past 2 days felt like a strange dream. She was in a castle in Romania with a vampire who seemed more like a lonely gentleman than a monster, all to save her mother's life. If someone had told her this story a week ago, she would have thought they were crazy. She pulled out her phone to text her mother, then realized she had no signal. Panic began to rise in her chest until she noticed an old-fashioned telephone on the nightstand. When she picked it up, a voice immediately answered. "Good evening, Miss Emily. How may I help you? I'd like to call my mom in the hospital, please." Of course. One moment. The phone rang once before her mother's weak voice answered. "Hello, Mom. It's me. How are you feeling?" "Emily, sweetheart, where are you? The nurse said you left a note about getting treatment, but I don't understand. I'm staying with a family friend while you get better. Mom, the doctors say you're going to be okay. There's a new treatment, and someone paid for everything." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Emily, what have you done?" "Nothing bad, Mom. I promise. I just found someone who could help. You're going to get better, and we're going to be together again soon." They talked for several more minutes, and Emily was relieved to hear that her mother's voice already sounded stronger. When she finally hung up, she felt a mixture of joy and homesickness that made her throat tight. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Adrian entered, carrying a tray with hot chocolate and cookies. "Mrs. Kovac thought you might like a bedtime snack. She has a gift for knowing exactly what people need." "Thank you." Emily accepted the warm mug gratefully. "I talked to my mom. She sounds better already. I'm glad the treatment works quickly once it begins." Adrian sat in a chair near the window, maintaining his respectful distance. "Are you having second thoughts about staying here?" Emily considered the question seriously. "A little. This is all so strange. But my mom is going to live, and that's all that matters to me. You're wise beyond your years. Most adults would have run screaming by now." "Maybe I'm just too tired to run," Emily said with a small smile. Adrian laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine. Perhaps you see something that others miss." "What do you mean? You look at me and see a person, not a monster." "That's a rare gift, Emily. Most people see what they expect to see based on stories and prejudices. You see what's actually there." Emily sipped her hot chocolate thoughtfully. "My mom always told me that monsters usually look like regular people and that the scariest monsters are the ones who seem normal. Real monsters don't usually announce themselves. Your mother is a wise woman. She is. I miss her already. The year will pass more quickly than you think, and perhaps by the end of it you'll have helped an old monster remember what it means to be human again." Emily studied his face in the firelight. Despite his pale skin and otherworldly grace, there was something fundamentally sad about Adrian, as if he carried the weight of centuries of loneliness. "What was it like when you were human?" "I was young, arrogant, and convinced I knew everything about the world. I thought power and immortality would solve all my problems." He was quiet for a moment. "I was very wrong. Do you regret becoming a vampire?" "Every day, but regret is useless without action to make amends. I've spent the last 2 centuries trying to use what I am for good rather than evil." "Is that why you're helping my mom?" "To make amends? Partly, but mostly because a 12-year-old girl impressed me with her courage and selflessness. When Helena told me about your situation, I saw an opportunity for both of us to find something we needed." Emily finished her hot chocolate and settled deeper into the comfortable bed. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, I show you your new home. We begin to learn about each other, and you start helping me remember what it feels like to care about someone again." "I'm scared," Emily admitted. "Fear is wisdom in the face of the unknown, but I promise you, Emily, no harm will come to you under my protection. You are safe here." After Adrian left, Emily lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of the ancient castles settling around her. Somewhere in the walls she could hear the whisper of wind through stone corridors, and in the distance the call of night birds in the forest. It was different from the constant noise of the city she was used to, but not unpleasant. She thought about her mother hopefully sleeping peacefully for the first time in months without the constant pain that had become her companion. She thought about the year ahead, living in this strange, beautiful place with a vampire who seemed more human than many actual humans she had known. And she thought about the courage her mother had always told her she possessed, courage she hadn't believed in until she found herself willing to travel halfway around the world to save the person she loved most. As sleep finally claimed her, Emily's last conscious thought was that perhaps fairy tales weren't always about princesses and happily ever after. Sometimes they were about ordinary girls who discovered they were braver than they ever imagined, and about monsters who desperately wanted to remember how to be good. The next morning, Emily woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and the smell of something delicious cooking somewhere in the castle. When she looked outside, she gasped at the view. The castle sat on a high cliff overlooking a valley filled with mist and ancient forests. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still covered in snow despite the warmth of the sun on her face. Mrs. Kovach appeared with fresh clothes and news that Master Adrian was waiting for her in the dining room. Emily dressed quickly, eager to explore her new temporary home and continue learning about the man who had saved her mother's life. She found Adrian in a sunny dining room that felt surprisingly normal despite the castle's Gothic exterior. He was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee from a delicate china cup. When she entered, he stood and pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Good morning, Emily. I hope you slept well?" "I did, thank you. Is it okay that I slept so late?" "I usually wake up early to take care of things for my mom." "You're a child, not a caregiver. Here, your only responsibility is to be young and curious and to help me remember what that feels like." He gestured to a buffet table laden with fresh fruit, pastries, and other breakfast foods. "Please, eat whatever you like. Mrs. Kovach has prepared enough food for a small army." As Emily filled her plate, she noticed that Adrian wasn't eating. "Don't you eat regular food?" "I can, but I don't need to. My dietary requirements are different." "Do you drink blood?" The question slipped out before Emily could stop herself. Adrian didn't seem offended. "Not from people. I've learned to sustain myself through other means. It's one of the changes I made when I decided to stop being a monster." "What kind of other means?" "There are blood banks that sell expired supplies. Animal blood works as well, though it's not as nourishing. And there are synthetic alternatives available now. Modern science has made it possible for creatures like me to exist without harming innocents." Emily found this fascinating rather than disturbing. "How long have you been eating that way?" "About 200 years. It was a difficult transition, but necessary if I wanted to live with myself." After breakfast, Adrian gave Emily a tour of the castle that took most of the morning. The library was enormous, with books stacked from floor to ceiling in a room that felt like a cathedral dedicated to knowledge. The music room contained instruments Emily had only seen in museums, including a piano that Adrian told her had been played by famous composers whose names she recognized from her music classes at school. The greenhouse was her favorite discovery. Despite the castle's location high in the mountains, the glass room was warm and humid, filled with flowers and plants from around the world. Adrian explained that he had always loved growing things and that gardening helped him feel connected to life rather than death. "It's beautiful," Emily said, touching the petals of a flower that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "Everything beautiful requires care and patience," Adrian observed. "Plants, relationships, even redemption. Nothing worthwhile happens quickly." They spent the afternoon in the library, where Adrian showed Emily books written in languages she had never seen before and told her stories about the places he had traveled over the centuries. She learned that he spoke 12 languages fluently, had witnessed historical events she had only read about in textbooks, and possessed knowledge that couldn't be found in any book. "What's it like to live that long?" she asked as they sat by the fire in the library's reading area. "Lonely," Adrian said without hesitation, "but also educational. You learn that human nature doesn't change much over the centuries. People still want the same basic things. Love, security, purpose, someone to remember them when they're gone? What do you want? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I want to matter. I want my existence to have meaning beyond mere survival. I want to be worthy of redemption. I think helping my mom makes you worthy of redemption. One good deed doesn't erase 8 centuries of mistakes. Maybe not, but it's a start. That evening, they had dinner together in the dining room, and Emily told Adrian about her life back home. She talked about school, her friends, the small apartment she shared with her mother, and the fear that had consumed her life for months as she watched her mother grow sicker. "You've grown up too fast," Adrian observed. "Children shouldn't have to worry about adult problems. Sometimes they don't have a choice. When my dad left, someone had to take care of things." "Your father left when your mother became ill?" "Before that. He said he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family. Mom got sick about 6 months after he left." Adrian's expression darkened. "A man who abandons his family is the worst kind of coward. I used to be angry about it, but then I realized we were better off without him. Mom and I became a team. We took care of each other. And now you're taking care of her by being here." "I guess so, though it doesn't feel like I'm doing much." "You sacrificed everything familiar and safe to save her life. That's not nothing, Emily. That's heroism." As the days passed, Emily settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. She would wake up and have breakfast with Adrian, then spend the morning exploring different parts of the castle or reading in the library. Afternoons were often spent in the greenhouse, where Adrian taught her about different plants and their properties. Evenings were reserved for conversation by the fire, where they would talk about everything from history to philosophy to Emily's dreams for the future. Emily called her mother every day and was thrilled to hear the improvement in her voice. The mysterious treatment was working exactly as Adrian had promised. Sarah was growing stronger daily, and the doctors were amazed by her rapid recovery. "I still don't understand how this is all being paid for," Sarah said during one of their conversations. "The billing department says an anonymous donor has covered everything, including experimental treatments I've never heard of." "Does it matter how it's being paid for? You're getting better." "It matters because I don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, Emily. This family friend you're staying with. I want to talk to them." Emily glanced at Adrian, who was reading nearby. "Maybe when you're feeling stronger, Mom." "Emily Marie Chen, you tell me the truth. Are you safe where you are?" "I'm safe, Mom, I promise. I've never been safer anywhere in my life." And it was true. Despite the supernatural nature of her situation, Emily felt completely protected in the castle. Adrian was unfailingly gentle and respectful. Mrs. Kovach treated her like a beloved granddaughter, and the other staff members she occasionally encountered were kind and courteous. More importantly, Emily was beginning to understand that Adrian needed her presence as much as she needed his help. She could see the change in him over the weeks, the way his posture became less rigid, the way genuine smiles replaced the polite expressions he wore like masks. When they talked, she could see glimpses of the man he must have been before centuries of isolation had hardened him. One evening, as they sat in the music room listening to Adrian play a hauntingly beautiful piece on the piano, Emily realized that she was no longer counting the days until she could go home. The castle was becoming home. Adrian was becoming family. And the scared little girl who had arrived in the middle of the night was learning that sometimes the most frightening decisions led to the most wonderful discoveries. But their peaceful routine was about to be disrupted by visitors who would test everything Emily thought she understood about her new life and force Adrian to confront enemies he had hoped were lost to history. Emily had been living in the castle for 6 weeks when the first sign of trouble appeared. She was reading in the library when Mrs. Kovach burst through the doors, her usually composed face pale with worry. "Master Adrian," she called urgently, "they're coming!" Adrian looked up from the ancient text he had been studying, his expression instantly shifting to one of alert concern. "Who's coming, Iva?" "Victor Drackle and his followers. The scouts spotted them an hour's ride away. They'll be here before sunset." Emily watched Adrian's face transform. The gentle, contemplative man she had come to know disappeared, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. His green eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire, and for the first time since her arrival, Emily truly understood what he was capable of. "Take Emily to the safe room," Adrian commanded, standing with fluid grace. "Lock her in and don't let her out until this is over." "Wait," Emily said, rising from her chair. "Who is Victor Drackle? Why are you so worried?" Adrian turned to her, and she could see the struggle in his expression between protection and honesty. "Victor is my brother, my elder brother, who chose a very different path than mine. Your brother is coming to visit? That doesn't sound so bad. Emily, Victor still lives the old way. He believes that vampires should rule over humans, not coexist with them. He spent the last 2 centuries building a following of others who share his beliefs. He's also spent that time trying to convince me to abandon my foolish attempts at redemption." Mrs. Kovach approached Emily with gentle urgency. "Come, child. Master Adrian speaks truth. Victor is dangerous, especially to someone like you." "What do you mean, someone like me?" Adrian knelt in front of Emily, taking her hands in his cold ones. "You represent everything Victor despises. You're human, innocent, and proof that I've chosen humanity over our kind. Your presence here will be seen as weakness, and Victor has never tolerated weakness." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the castle's stone walls. "What will he do? I don't know, but I won't let him hurt you. That's why you need to hide until he leaves." "What if he doesn't leave? What if he tries to hurt you?" For a moment, Adrian's expression softened. "Are you worried about me, little one?" "Of course I am." "You saved my mom. You're my friend." The word friend seemed to affect Adrian deeply. He was quiet for a moment, then stood and began issuing rapid instructions to Mrs. Kovach. Emily found herself being hurried through corridors she had never seen before, down stone steps that led to parts of the castle that felt far older and more ominous than her comfortable room upstairs. The safe room turned out to be a small chamber with thick stone walls, comfortable furnishings, and shelves stocked with food and water. Mrs. Kovach showed Emily how to operate the heavy door from the inside and made her promise not to open it for anyone except Adrian himself. "What if something happens to him?" Emily asked. "Nothing will happen to Master Adrian," Mrs. Kovach said firmly. "He's survived 800 years. He won't be stopped by his arrogant brother." But Emily heard the worry beneath her confident words. Left alone in the safe room, Emily tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. She paced the small space, listening for sounds from above. The castle's thick walls muffled most noise, but she occasionally heard what sounded like voices raised in anger. Hours passed. Emily dozed fitfully in the comfortable chair, waking repeatedly to strain her ears for any indication of what was happening above. She thought about her mother, now fully recovered and probably wondering why their phone calls had become shorter and less frequent over the past week. She thought about Adrian, facing family members who saw his kindness as weakness. Near midnight, Emily heard footsteps on the stone stairs outside the safe room. She pressed herself against the far wall, heart pounding, as someone knocked on the heavy door. "Emily, it's Adrian. You can open the door now." Relief flooded through her as she recognized his voice, but something stopped her from immediately opening the door. The voice sounded like Adrian, but there was something different about it, a slight change in tone that made her hesitate. "How do I know it's really you?" she called through the door. "Because I'm the one who told you that regret is useless without action to make amends," came the reply. "And because I know you have a stubborn streak that comes from your mother." Emily recognized the reference to one of their conversations and opened the door. Adrian stood in the corridor, but something was definitely different. His clothes were torn. There was a cut on his cheek that was healing even as she watched, and his eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, reaching toward the cut on his face. Adrian caught her hand gently. "I'm fine. Victor and his followers have left. Did they hurt you?" "Nothing I haven't survived before." He led her back toward the stairs. "I'm sorry you had to hide. I know how frightening it must have been." As they climbed the stone steps, Emily noticed that Adrian seemed more tense than usual, constantly glancing around as if expecting trouble. When they reached the main floor of the castle, she saw signs of the confrontation: furniture overturned in the great hall, scorch marks on the walls that looked suspiciously like they might have come from fire, and several tapestries hanging in tatters. "What happened here?" Emily asked, staring at the destruction. "Family disagreements can become quite heated when supernatural abilities are involved," Adrian said dryly. "Mrs. Kovac and the staff will have everything restored by morning." But as they walked through the damaged halls, Emily began to notice other things that didn't seem right. The paintings on the walls seemed different somehow, though she couldn't put her finger on what had changed. The castle felt colder, as if the warmth she had grown accustomed to had been drained away. Most disturbing of all, Adrian kept glancing at her with an expression she had never seen before, something hungry and calculating that made her skin crawl. When they reached her room, Adrian lingered in the doorway longer than usual. "Emily, I want you to know that having you here has meant more to me than you can imagine. I'm glad I could help." Emily studied his face, trying to understand why something felt wrong. "Adrian, are you sure you're okay? You seem different." "How so?" "I don't know exactly. Just different." Adrian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps I'm simply tired. It's been a long night." After Adrian left, Emily sat on her bed trying to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had spent enough time with Adrian to recognize his mannerisms, his way of speaking, even the way he moved. The man who had escorted her from the safe room looked like Adrian and sounded like Adrian, but something fundamental was off. Unable to sleep, Emily decided to explore. If Adrian was really fine, he wouldn't mind her moving around the castle. And if something was wrong, she needed to find out what. The corridors were darker than usual, with fewer candles lit than normal. Emily made her way toward the library, thinking she might find Adrian there reading, as he often did when he couldn't sleep. But the library was empty, though she noticed several books scattered on the floor as if someone had swept them off the shelves in anger. She continued to the greenhouse, thinking the peaceful atmosphere might calm her nerves. But when she reached the glass room, she gasped in horror. The beautiful plants Adrian had tended so carefully were withered and dying, their leaves blackened as if they had been touched by frost. The fountain in the center of the room, which had bubbled cheerfully with clear water, now ran dark and stagnant. Emily backed out of the greenhouse, her heart pounding with certainty that something was very, very wrong. Either Adrian was much more badly hurt than he had admitted, and his condition was somehow affecting the castle, or the man she had spoken to wasn't Adrian at all. Moving more carefully now, Emily made her way toward Adrian's private chambers, an area of the castle she had never explored. The corridors grew colder as she walked, and she began to hear sounds that made her blood freeze, low growling like angry animals, and occasionally what sounded like someone crying out in pain. She found the source of the sounds behind a heavy wooden door marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Pressing her ear to the door, she could clearly hear someone groaning as if they were badly injured. Without thinking, she tried the handle and found the door unlocked. The room beyond was clearly a dungeon, with stone walls and iron bars forming several cells. In one of the cells, Emily saw a figure slumped against the far wall. Even in the dim light, she recognized the elegant clothes and dark hair. "Adrian?" she whispered. The figure raised its head, and Emily saw Adrian's face, battered and bloody but unmistakably him. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Emily, you have to run." "Get out of the castle now!" "What happened? Who did this to you?" "Victor. He's taken my place." "The man you spoke to upstairs, that's not me. Victor can change his appearance to match mine perfectly. It's one of his abilities." Emily's mind raced. "How do I know you're really Adrian and not Victor pretending to be you?" Even through his pain, Adrian managed a small smile. "Because Victor would never have thought to ask that question. You're learning to be appropriately suspicious, little one. I have to get you out of here." "No, the cell is locked with supernatural barriers. You can't free me. But you can escape. There's a passage in the library behind the bookshelf with works by Shakespeare. Press the spine of Romeo and Juliet and the shelf will swing open. Follow the tunnel. It leads to a village about 5 miles away. From there, you can get help." Emily shook her head stubbornly. I'm not leaving you. Emily, listen to me carefully. Victor brought you down here not to rescue you, but to test whether you would run. He's watching everything we do right now. He wants to see if you're loyal enough to be worth keeping alive, or if you'll abandon me when things get dangerous. Why does he want to keep me alive at all? Because he's realized what I realized, that you have a gift for seeing the good in monsters. He wants to corrupt that gift to turn you into someone who will help him become more powerful. Emily felt sick with fear, but also angry. What happens if I fail his test? Then he'll kill both of us. Emily stood up straighter, her jaw set with determination. Then, I guess I better pass his test. Before Adrian could protest, Emily walked back toward the dungeon door. I'm going to find Victor and tell him I want to stay with him instead of you.
Emily, not—
He'll see through any deception. Victor has been alive for nearly 1,000 years. He's too clever to be fooled by a 12-year-old girl, maybe. But you taught me that sometimes the most frightening decisions lead to the most wonderful discoveries. I have to try. Emily left the dungeon and made her way back through the castle, her mind working furiously to develop a plan. She needed to convince Victor that she was worth keeping alive, at least long enough to find a way to rescue Adrian. But how could she convince an ancient vampire that a human child was valuable to him? She found Victor in the great hall, lounging in Adrian's favorite chair by the fire. Up close, the resemblance to Adrian was perfect, but now that she knew what to look for, Emily could see the differences. Victor sat with the arrogance of someone accustomed to absolute power. His smile was cold and calculating rather than warm and gentle, and his eyes, while the same green color as Adrian's, held no compassion or humor. "Ah, Emily," Victor said without turning around. "I wondered when you would come looking for me." "I know who you are," Emily said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Do you now? How interesting." Victor turned to face her, studying her with predatory interest. "And what do you know? I know you're not Adrian. I know you hurt him and locked him up. And I know you're testing me to see if I'm worth keeping alive." Victor clapped his hands slowly. "Excellent. Much more perceptive than I expected. No wonder my brother has grown so fond of you. What do you want from me?" "The same thing Adrian wanted but used more efficiently. You have a remarkable gift, child, the ability to see potential for good even in creatures like us. Adrian wasted that gift on his pathetic attempts at redemption. I could teach you to use it to help me build an empire." Emily forced herself to step closer to Victor, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "What kind of empire? One where vampires take their rightful place as rulers over humanity. We are faster, stronger, and far more intelligent than humans. We should be guiding human civilization, not hiding in the shadows pretending to be something we're not. And what would be my role in this empire?" Victor smiled, and Emily saw fangs that Adrian had never displayed. "You would be my advisor on human nature. Your innocence allows you to see things that centuries of experience have blinded me to. With your insights, I could appear benevolent while maintaining absolute control." Emily pretended to consider this. What happens to Adrian? Adrian has chosen to cling to his weakness. He's become useless to our kind. But you, little Emily, could become something truly special. Imagine the power you would wield as the human who helped vampires reclaim their rightful dominance.
"It sounds tempting," Emily said carefully.
"But I need to know you're strong enough to keep your promises. Adrian saved my mother's life. What have you ever done for me?" Victor's eyes flashed with irritation. "I am offering you power beyond your wildest dreams, child. What more could you want? Proof that you're better than Adrian. He could save one human life. Can you save more?" "I could save or destroy thousands of lives with a single command." "Then prove it. There are sick children in the hospital where my mom was treated. If you're really more powerful than Adrian, save them all." Victor studied Emily for a long moment. "You're attempting to manipulate me. I'm testing your abilities the same way you're testing my loyalty. If I'm going to help you build an empire, I need to know you can deliver on your promises. And if I save these children, you will serve me willingly. If you can do something Adrian couldn't do, then yes, I'll serve you willingly." Victor smiled triumphantly. Very well. Consider it done. By morning, every sick child in that hospital will be completely cured. Emily nodded, trying not to let her relief show. She had just manipulated an ancient vampire into saving innocent lives. And Adrian? What about him? I want to say goodbye. If I'm going to serve you instead of him, I should at least tell him why. Victor considered this. Very well, but make it brief. Sentiment is a weakness you'll need to overcome if you want to survive in my world. Emily made her way back to the dungeon, her heart pounding with the desperate hope that her plan would work. When she reached Adrian's cell, she knelt down close to the bars. I convinced Victor to save all the sick children in my mom's hospital, she whispered. He thinks I'm going to serve him, but I need you to tell me how to stop him. Adrian's eyes filled with pride despite his pain. Brilliant girl, but Victor is too powerful for either of us to defeat directly. Then what do we do? There's something Victor doesn't know. When I chose to stop feeding on humans, I didn't just change my diet. I gave up most of my supernatural strength as well. It was part of my penance, my way of ensuring I could never again become the monster I once was. So you're weaker than Victor? In terms of physical power, yes. But Victor's strength comes from his hunger and his cruelty. If he were to suddenly feel genuine compassion, genuine remorse for his actions, it would weaken him considerably. Emily understood immediately. You want me to make him feel human emotions. It's the only way. But Emily, it's incredibly dangerous. If you fail, if you push too hard, too fast, he'll kill you without hesitation. How do I make a vampire feel compassion? The same way you made me remember my humanity. You show him kindness when he expects cruelty. You respond to his darkness with light. You refuse to become the monster he wants you to be. Emily nodded, though she felt terrified by the magnitude of what Adrian was asking. What if it doesn't work? Then at least you'll have saved those children and your mother will live a full, healthy life. That's not nothing, Emily. That's everything. Emily squeezed Adrian's hand through the bars. I won't let him win. I know you won't. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Emily made her way back to the great hall where Victor was waiting with an expression of smug satisfaction. It's done, he announced. Every sick child in that hospital will wake up tomorrow completely cured. Now shall we discuss your new position in my organization? Actually, Emily said, settling into a chair across from him, I want to know more about you first. What was it like growing up with Adrian? Victor looked surprised by the question. What does it matter? If I'm going to work with you, I should understand your history. Adrian told me stories about his human life. What was yours like? Unimportant, ancient history. But you must have been human once, too. Did you have friends? Family besides Adrian? Victor's expression grew uncomfortable. I've spent too many centuries as what I am now to waste time reminiscing about my mortal existence. That's sad, Emily said simply. Sad? What do you mean? It's sad that you've forgotten who you used to be. Adrian remembers his human life clearly. He told me about learning to play piano, about books he loved, about people who were kind to him. Those memories help him stay connected to his humanity. Humanity is weakness, is it? You just saved dozens of children you've never met because a human child asked you to. That seems pretty human to me. Victor fell silent, clearly disturbed by Emily's observation. Emily pressed her advantage. Adrian told me that you two were close when you were human. He said you used to protect him from bullies because he was smaller. Adrian told you that. He said you were his hero when you were children. He tried to be brave like you. For the first time since Emily had met him, Victor looked uncertain. I had forgotten. What was it like to have a little brother who looked up to you? Victor was quiet for a long moment. It felt good to be needed, to be seen as someone worth emulating. Do you miss that feeling? I don't allow myself to miss anything. Nostalgia is another form of weakness. Or maybe it's what keeps us connected to the best parts of ourselves. Emily continued talking to Victor throughout the night. gently asking questions about his past, sharing stories about her own family, and gradually drawing him into conversations about emotions he had spent centuries suppressing. She could see the internal struggle in his expression as buried memories surfaced and forgotten feelings began to stir. As dawn approached, Victor grew increasingly agitated. "Stop," he commanded. "Whatever you're trying to do, stop it now. I'm just talking to you." "Is that so threatening? You're trying to make me weak like Adrian." "No, I'm trying to help you remember that strength and compassion aren't opposites. The strongest people I know are also the kindest." Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "You don't understand what you're asking. For centuries, I've survived by suppressing every human impulse, every gentle emotion. If I allow those feelings back in, you might discover that you don't need cruelty to be powerful." Victor spun around, his fangs extended and his eyes glowing with supernatural fury. "Enough! You think your childish psychology can undo centuries of carefully constructed defenses? I am not my weak brother." But Emily could see that her words were having an effect. Victor's hands were shaking, and there was something almost desperate in his anger. "You're scared," she realized. "I fear nothing. You're scared that if you let yourself care about anything, you'll be vulnerable. But Victor, you're already vulnerable. Loneliness is its own kind of weakness. I am not lonely. I have followers, servants, an entire organization that obeys my every command. But do any of them actually care about you? Or do they just fear you?" The question hit Victor like a physical blow. He staggered backward, clutching his chest as if in pain. "What have you done to me?" Emily stood and approached him carefully. "I haven't done anything except remind you that you used to be human. That part of you is still there, Victor. It's been buried under centuries of anger and hurt, but it's still there." "Make it stop," Victor gasped, falling to his knees. "Make these feelings stop." "I can't, but you can choose what to do with them." Victor looked up at Emily with eyes that were no longer cold and calculating, but filled with confusion and pain. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I am," Adrian learned. It took him time, but he learned to use his power to help instead of harm. You could do the same. The things I've done, the people I've hurt, can't be changed. But you can choose to be different starting now. Victor was quiet for a long moment, the internal war visible on his face. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Release Adrian?" "What? You heard me. Release my brother. This is his castle, his life. I have no right to take it from him." Emily felt a surge of hope. "Will you really let him go?" "I'll do more than that. I'll leave and never trouble him again." Victor looked at Emily with something approaching respect. "You've accomplished something I thought was impossible, little one. You've made me remember what it feels like to have a conscience." Victor led Emily back to the dungeon and, with a gesture, caused the supernatural barriers holding Adrian's cell to dissolve. Adrian emerged, battered but alert, his eyes moving between his brother and Emily with amazement. "Victor," Adrian said carefully, "what's happened?" "I've been reminded of who I used to be," Victor replied. "And I've been shown that strength and cruelty don't have to be the same thing." He turned to Emily. "You could have asked me to release Adrian hours ago and I would have done it. Instead, you chose to save those children first. That kind of selfless thinking is exactly what I need to learn." "Where will you go?" Adrian asked. "I don't know yet, but I have 8 centuries of damage to undo. It's going to take time to figure out how to use my abilities for good instead of evil." Victor walked to the dungeon door, then paused. "Adrian, I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become. You chose the harder path, but it was the right one." "Victor, take care of her," Victor interrupted, looking at Emily. "She's remarkable. And Emily, thank you for giving me back my soul." After Victor left, Adrian and Emily made their way back to the main part of the castle. The damage from the confrontation was already being repaired by Mrs. Kovac and the staff, who seemed unsurprised by the night's events. "How do you feel?" Emily asked Adrian as they settled in the library. "Physically, I'll heal. Emotionally, Adrian paused, considering. I never thought I'd see my brother choose redemption over power. What you did tonight was extraordinary. I just talked to him. You taught me that everyone has goodness inside them if you look hard enough. Even so, what you accomplished was remarkable. Victor had spent centuries perfecting his cruelty. For you to reach through all that anger and pain to find the decent man underneath, do you think he'll really change? I think he'll try. And sometimes trying is enough to begin with. Emily curled up in her favorite chair, suddenly exhausted by the night's events. Adrian, I want to ask you something. Anything. When my year here is finished, when I go back to my mom, will you be okay? Will you go back to being lonely? Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile Emily had seen from him since Victor's arrival. I'll miss you terribly. But I won't go back to being the isolated creature I was before. You've taught me that connection with others is worth the risk of eventual loss. I think I'll find ways to help more people, maybe even find other companions who need what I have to offer. Good. Because being alone isn't good for anyone, even vampires. Especially vampires. 3 days later, Emily received word that her mother had been cleared for discharge from the hospital. All of her medical bills had been paid, and a substantial amount of money had been deposited in Sarah's bank account from an anonymous donor. Most remarkably, the children's ward where her mother had been treated reported miraculous recoveries among all their patients. Overnight, every sick child had been completely cured. Emily spent her last week in the castle helping Adrian plan for the future. They discussed the foundation he wanted to establish to fund medical research, the scholarship program he was considering for children who had lost parents, and the network of safe houses he hoped to create for people fleeing dangerous situations. You know, Emily said as they walked through the greenhouse, now restored to its former beauty, I think you're going to do more good in the world than most people who live 10 normal lifetimes. I hope so. I have a lot to make up for. We all do. That's what growing up means, learning to be better than you were yesterday. On Emily's last night in the castle, Adrian gave her a gift, a small silver locket that matched the one Helena had given her. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them taken in the library. So you'll remember your time here, Adrian said. I could never forget. This place changed my life. You changed mine as well. You gave me back my faith in the possibility of redemption. The next morning, Helena arrived to escort Emily back to America. Emily hugged Mrs. Kovachaw goodbye, promised to write often, and finally turned to Adrian for their farewell. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Thank you for showing an old monster how to be human again. Emily hugged him tightly, surprised to find that his skin was warmer than it had been when she first arrived. You're not a monster, Adrian. You're one of the best people I've ever known. The journey home passed quickly. Emily's mother was waiting at the airport, healthy and radiant and crying with joy at seeing her daughter again. As they embraced, Emily marveled at how different everything felt. A year ago, she had been a frightened child watching her mother die. Now she was someone who had faced down ancient vampires and helped them remember their humanity. I missed you so much, Sarah whispered. How was your time away? Emily smiled, thinking of Gothic castles and midnight conversations and the gentle vampire who had become her friend. It was an adventure, Mom. A real adventure. Years later, Emily would go on to become a counselor specializing in helping people overcome trauma and find their way back to hope. She never forgot the lessons she learned in that castle. That monsters were often just people who had forgotten how to be good. That courage meant choosing to help others even when you were terrified. And that sometimes the most frightening decisions led to the most wonderful discoveries. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, Emily would receive letters written on elegant paper in flowing handwriting telling her about a foundation that had funded the construction of hospitals around the world, about scholarships that had sent thousands of children to college, and about a reformed vampire who had found his purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The letters were always signed the same way, with eternal gratitude and friendship, Adrian. Emily would write back, sharing stories about her work, her life, and the people she was helping. She would tell him about former patients who had overcome impossible odds, about families reunited, about hope restored in places where despair had once reigned. It was a friendship that transcended the supernatural, built on mutual respect and the understanding that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Emily had saved her mother's life by going to that castle, but in the process she had also saved 2 ancient vampires' souls and discovered the strength she never knew she possessed. And in the end, that was worth any risk she had taken, any fear she had faced. Love, Emily learned, was always worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. Mom is sick, so I took her place. A small girl entered the Vampire King's palace. He froze at the sight of her.